Welcome to DWBIADDA channel. Please subscribe for latest training videos.
Hello to you all. Today we are going to talk about Android fragments. What is Android fragment? Android fragment is the part of activity and it is also known as subactivity. There can be one or more fragment in an activity. Fragments represent multiple screens inside one activity. Fragments life cycle is affected by activity life cycle because fragments are included in activity. They are subparts of activity. Each fragment has its own life cycle method that is affected by activity life cycle because fragments are embedded in activity. The fragment manager class is responsible to make interaction between fragment objects. We use fragments to avoid the time loss in switching between two activities. Switching between fragments is more practical and it saves phone's memory. Let's find fragments in our app. So let's go to the app folder, then Java, then this folder, and then we have our fragments in this folder, fragment classes. So let's open one of these classes. Let's say home, and here is how the fragment looks. So we have name of our class, that's fragment home, and then extends fragment, implements view on click list. I'll explain this later, but for now let's explain this function. To provide a layout for a fragment, you must implement the onCreateView callback method, which the Android system calls when it's time for the fragment to draw its layout. Your implementation of this method must return a view that is the root of your fragment's layout. And here it returns a view. To return a layout from onCreateView, you can inflate it from a layout resource defined in XML. To help you do so, onCreateView provides a layout inflater object. So the inflate method takes 3 arguments. As you can see here, 3 arguments. First is the resource ID of the layout you want to inflate. This is the air.layout fragment home. It's this layout. Let me show you. Fragment home. Then the view group to be the parent of the inflated layout. Views container. And then a boolean indicating whether the inflated layout should be attached to the view group, the second parameter, during inflation. And in my case it's false. Now you've seen how to create a fragment that provides a layout. Next, you need to add the fragment to your activity. How you can do that? Usually a fragment contributes a portion of UI to the host activity, which is embedded as a part of the activity's overall view hierarchy. There are 2 ways you can add a fragment to the activity layout. Declare the fragment inside activity's layout file, or programmatically add the fragment to an existing view group. Now we're at the statistic activity where I will explain you how I added my fragment to activity. I used a programmatically adding way, so let's explain that. We have this line of code here. Get support fragment manager dot begin transaction dot replace, and then air.id dot fragment container new fragment home dot commit to set the fragment home for the default fragment which appears when we open this activity, statistic activity. And then we have bottom navigation view, that's the bottom navigation bar. I'll show you now. I explained what the bottom navigation bar is in some of tutorials. Here is the bottom navigation bar, and when we click on one of these icons, this will be called bottom navigation view on navigation item selected listener. So when we select item from navigation bar, this will happen. So we have fragment called selected fragment and it's null from default. Then we have switch function and we switch which item is chosen, and then by its ID our fragment gets the value of fragment which we selected, fragment home or fragment graph or fragment calendar. And then after that we go to the get support fragment manager.begin transaction, same code as here, and then we use the select fragment which has value fragment calendar, graph or fragment home, and then we go to that fragment and return true here. So that's about adding fragment to activity. Now, as I promised, I'm back on fragment home so I can explain you why I implemented this view on onclicklistener. It's because in fragment you can use button.setOnClickListener function like we used to do in our activities here. In fragment we need to implement this view.onClickListener and then to override function public void onClick. So every time when we click on some design object, we're getting view from our screen, and by that view we're getting ID of design object which is clicked. We have switch function with ID of clicked object, and if it matches the ID of image invested, then we're doing something here. Accurately, we're sending it to investments activity. If that ID is similar like image incomes ID, then we're going to the activity and comes, and we have different variations here so you understand what I'm talking. Instead of getting button.setOnClickListener function, we get ID from clicked element and then find through our design objects which element it is, and we're doing some functions after that. It is specifical and I had many problems to understand this, but it's very simple when someone's there to explain you how you can do it. Also, we need to call this function every time when someone clicks on this, so image investments.setOnClickListener and then context for every one of these 4 design objects. And that's it about this view on onclicklistener. I hope that you understood why we need to do this. Now let's get to other fragments. We have fragment graph, which is almost the same like fragment home, inflator. Also we have view on onclicklistener. Also we are calling this function setOnClickListener and context here. We have some functions about graph here and about database here, on click functions. There are on click functions. Let me close this. So you can see we have many cases here, and we are again matching our IDs. Now let's go to fragment calendar, and as you can see we don't have here implements on onclicklistener because there is no option to click anything, and that's it. One important thing about initializing your objects here is that we use view.findViewById. So like we used to do with pop-ups, we do with fragments. So view.findViewById, because otherwise it will report an error here because our device will be searching for this ID in some other activity. So be careful with this. Now let's review how fragment layout looks. Here we are at the fragment home, then fragment graph, and then fragment calendar. And also these fragments, these layouts are like add to this activity. So imagine that this layout or this layout is on this activity. Maybe this picture will help you to understand how graph and activity looks. So as you can see, we have activity statistic layout, and then home fragment layout, and then when we turn our application and set fragment to activity, everything look like this. I hope that you understood everything well about fragments. Fragments are very useful and they're a big plus to your design because with fragments you can get some smooth transitions between two fragments, and as I said before, it saves your phone memory. It's quicker than changing between two activities. Also, fragments are a powerful yet misunderstood part of Android development. You can see developers rarely use fragments, so every time when you use it, you'll get unplus from your client. They help us reuse components in activities, view pages, and navigation drawers, among other advantages. On the other hand, their life cycle, use cases, and interaction with activities can be a complicated mess. There are two main types of fragments: static fragments and dynamic fragments. Static fragments are placed within an activity layout and never change. Dynamic fragments are almost reconfigurable puzzle pieces. They have their own life cycle, anatomy, classes, and even subtypes, with the addition of their layouts. Something similar to activity in many aspects. Using a dynamic fragment simply requires the usage of a container to place that fragment in. This is normally a fragment layout within a standard activity. Also, dynamic fragments have two main subtypes that are framework fragments and support fragments. Framework fragments have been around since fragments' inception, for 5 years ago. They are rarely updated and do not work with app-compat activity. Support fragments come from the version 4 support library and do work with app-compat activities. They are constantly updated alongside support library, usually 3 or 4 times per year. For this video, that would be it. We're done with fragments. See you in another video, and thank you. Bye.